Dylan, hello.
Hello, Alex.
Okay, at the 3CL, we have this tradition where whenever we meet strangers, we ask a very simple question. So, Dylan Seychell, who are you?
Thank you for the invitation, first of all. I'm Dylan, a lecturer in the Department of Artificial Intelligence at the University of Malta. My main area of specialization in AI is applied machine learning, where we apply technology to different aspects, and even computer vision, where we build algorithms that learn to perceive and understand visual information that we feed inside computers. From a project's perspective, where we get this research into real-life applications, we focus on two main categories. The first one is AI applied to the environment, where, for instance, we have projects where we use, for instance, drones to detect litter, plastic bottles, etc., from aerial imagery, and even other litter now from vehicles, etc., that would be in other environments. We have other projects that are also in this area. Then I have another stream of projects which are directly related to what we're discussing today. And these are about AI and its use in news analysis, journalism from both sides, for content creators and journalists, and even on the other sides for us as consumers of content and information.
Okay, so let's get to the context now, and I'm going to bring you into it. Okay, so there's my colleague Alex here, who's been roped in as a Gen Z person, born in 2002.
Token Gen Z person.
Very token Gen Z. And B, I'm currently teaching this guy, but I'm also have known him for quite a while. And this is really, I think, maybe the first of a series of conversations that we're going to try and have with academics in Malta who, in some shape or format, have anything to do with A, information, whatever that means, and B, young people, because I guess that's why we're here.
Yeah.
I guess. So I think we should first look at this concept of information and what is it. So that's the second complicated question I might ask you. What do you think information is within the context of young people and the world they're living in right now?
Yes, and information is indeed a very powerful word or notion that even spreads across different disciplines. And I think a very interesting perspective would be looking at information now from different facets. In fact, we have even an entire field of study, it's called information theory, that spans from economics to physics, computer science and AI, and of course other areas. So we observe different behavior in nature that is tied together through this information theory. And we also give it, now from a scientific side, I believe that somehow we can bridge it to content as well. But from a scientific perspective, we can also, we actually also link it to statistics and deep down probability, where we discuss the notion of information as a set of events or particular events and the probability of occurrence for each event. And therefore, you get elements of surprise and you get valuable information because you were not expecting that information. And therefore, it makes that information even more interesting. And we call that entropy. And entropy is the level of expectancy behind an information. There are some examples we can give. If you, for instance, you're following the news, you won't see on the news the headline, today it was really hot in the desert, because there's no surprise there. But if there were 20 centimeters of snowfall in the desert, then yes, perhaps it's different. We're not expecting that. And that we would say it is newsworthy because it has a high level of entropy. So these are things that we measure all the time. So we start with simple games such as tossing a coin, throwing a dice, etc. So depending on what you're expecting out of it, then you get different levels of what we call entropy. So if you're tossing a coin and it's a fair coin, you have the same probability of getting heads and tails. And in that case, if it's a fair coin, it has maximum probability, maximum entropy, because equal sides. If it is weighted on one side more than the other, so it's more likely to get heads than tails, then you have less entropy. And if you have a coin which has the same thing on both sides, then you have no entropy because you have certainty that you always know what you're going to get at the end. So there is this idea in pure science in terms of information theory that is then extended to pixel values, context into words, etc., that I think can shed a lot of light on a lot of issues and questions we have about information when it comes to content. I hope that wasn't too heavy.
No, it was and it wasn't. And I think what's really interesting is that because I'm a social scientist, I guess, but very much embedded in humanities. But again, my background was in business, and I'm not afraid of technology, I guess. My understanding is there are other theories that I can kind of weave into this. For example, there's something called the pyramid principle technique. It used to be an advertising maxim where you would say, for instance, you make a statement like, it's hot today. And then you always assume that people are not going to believe you. So then somebody says, how do you know it's hot? And you say, because it's 35 degrees X. Okay, it's hot. And then somebody might say, but maybe it's not so hot because you've got air conditioning. So there's always, you have to prove. You keep on proving that at the end of the day, in terms of the pyramid, you're making your high-level statement here.
Okay.
But at the end of it, you really have all of these details. And it's actually something that I used as a strategist then, as a way of building strategic planning. And I've used this actual model. This is what you were reminding me of.
Interesting.
For all sorts of organizations, from UNESCO to the 3CL, actually. So it could well be the same that if I'm looking at young people, there are loads of sweeping statements about young people, hence the token young person who hasn't said anything. So you might say young people are, digital natives, for instance, okay? And then my classic theory is that, okay, so I'm 63 years old and I'm teaching digital natives. So what am I doing teaching anything related to?
Fair enough, but then you can also digital. Argue that within your context earlier, you were also a digital native in your own way. So I think what we really need to observe is how everyone is born in an era of technology. And you're a native within the context of your era. And therefore, you don't really learn the technology itself. You learn the transition of your society within that macro effect of technology. So when you're teaching, it doesn't really matter that you're 60 and he's 20-something, because if you're, in fact, that's what I like to tell my students. If you come to university to learn a principle, you're wasting your time, because that principle will, most of the time, especially in our subject, expire or be replaced by something better. You're here to learn how to learn. So you're not teaching them actual technology and how to use their technology today. You're teaching them how to strategize around the technology, understand the changes about the technology, and how that technology affects society and the environment where they're going to operate. So that renders you very valuable. So it's not a matter of the tools, yes, are totally different, or even they structure and reshape the way people think. But I think this is what we need to recognize. It's these different patterns that are emerging.
And history, in a way. Also, of course, history of technology.
History is always there, exactly. And if we were to even handle computers and just think about computers, if we were to think about the electrical computer, which is now around 8 years old at the moment, we can even split it in 8 decades. And each decade, from the 1940s until today, there were paradigm shifts that eventually even changed society. So starting even by the 1940s, computers were there to help the Allies win the war. All of a sudden, these were really powerful machines. Before computers as a machine, mechanical or electrical, computer was a job. People used to be contracted as computers to carry out very complicated calculations. So when society saw that there is this machine, it's called computer, just as the other professionals were being called, and it could do a better job, faster, it doesn't get tired, you don't need to pay, and so on, people were saying these machines are now intelligent. And that is why in the 1950s, the term artificial intelligence was actually coined, and it stuck because it's cool. But what happened was that in reality, there was no real intelligence in these machines. They were carrying out tasks that in the eye of society were being carried out by people who are very intelligent. So if the machine could do that, it means that the machine is intelligent, or they thought that it means that the machine is intelligent. But we know it was not the case. What happened was that these people became what those days were to call today software developers, programmers, etc., because they could harness the power of these machines that they can do a stable computation and in a really fast way And when I say stable computation, I weighed my words there because it doesn't mean it's a correct computation. It could be an incorrect computation, correct calculation, but it's stable. You can find where there is a mistake and you can compare accordingly. And they harnessed it in order to build the technology. And every single decade after that had its own paradigm shifts in technology that affected even the way people saw technology and used technology. So by that time, until the 70s, computers were the huge, powerful machine that you could only find at work. With the invention of the microprocessor in the 1970s, computers started to become really small. Entrepreneurs like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs saw an opportunity. And in fact, Microsoft and Apple were founded in the mid-70s. In the 80s, they were marketing these personal computers. So society started to see these computers as these devices that were no longer these powerful devices that were just at work. I could have one at home. In the 90s, the paradigm shift was the web. So all of a sudden, there was the web, there was browser wars, which even reshaped the economics of computing. 1998, Microsoft was in a massive legal battle with Netscape. And throughout that whole confusion, Google, Amazon, and so on were born, which are today's giants. And Microsoft is no longer the giant that was back then. And then 2000s, we had the mobile phones becoming more available and so on. So all that information became all of a sudden mobile. And for anyone like our token Gen Z was born after the year 2000, for them, having the internet is taken for granted, having mobile communication is taken for granted, and more or less having the internet in a mobile context is also taken for granted. So the way these people would look at information and navigate information is totally different because they were brought up in an environment where they don't need to go through an indexed encyclopedia to find information. They were brought up in an environment where you have an infinite set of source of information somewhere, and you have this little window called Google where you would type something to get the information that you need. And the quality of recall of information was actually everything. And they evolved and grew up in an environment where for them it's perfectly natural to query and get that back. For people now, fast forward 20 years, born after 2022, or within 2022, or growing up in 2022 post ChatGPT, where now that little box does not only get information, but it structures it, it reshapes it, based on what you know, who you are, etc. That now is changing information again. So Alex dealing with individuals who are younger than him now, but who are brought up in an environment where they don't need to really go through the results of the search engine and choose one, but they have one which is tailored for them. He will feel exactly the same thing that you're feeling. But the shifts are always there. And I think we need to recognize the pattern in these shifts, rather than zooming in on the detail of that particular generation.
So you're going to get old, Alex, at some stage?
He's already old, actually.
I'm already old. I'm 22. I already sense the difference between me and a lot of the iPad babies. But it's not because of that. I think it's like what Dylan's saying, which is it's the method of inquiry. Whereas you guys had, it's literal comparative analysis, right? Like, I go through the search engine, right? I look down and down and down, and that's if you're diligent, which I don't think statistically is the norm. I think most people just...
And they're designed to make you choose the top ones. And people pay to be placed really on top.
Well, it used to be the first page. If you're not on the first page of SERPs, no doubt
search engine optimization.
And if you pay, you're even on top of the
so
organic
you could game
results.
it.
Yeah, exactly. So
you could game it.
And that is also changing right now. Perhaps we can get to that later. But even SEO, as we know it, is no longer there for the next foreseeable future. So yes, these are things that are there. And I mentioned the iPad. In fact, the iPad was exactly in 2010, the idea of a tablet. And that's why he can even feel the difference right now. He was born in the early 2000s. And one born in the early 10s. Totally different.
It's an exponential shift.
It's quite stable, to be honest. I would debate whether it's exponential or not. The shift, the impact is exponential, but
Exactly.
the shift and the way things change is at the moment is still quite static. What's going to happen now because of the power of generative AI? That is something else, and that is why I think I think now it's the time where we really have serious challenges about how we need to rethink information and every structure around information, whether it's journalism, education, etc.
Let me pull slightly back, and then we go forward. Okay, my original interest in this whole shenanigans, which started with social media, because social media was deemed to be empowering 20 years ago, and we all thought it was going to liberate us. So ironically, a lot of the debate at the moment about free speech from across the pond is quite amusing for people like my generation, because we actually did think that social media was going to liberate us. The fact that you could say everything whenever you wanted to without gatekeepers.
And arguably it did in a way.
It did for a while.
But I think everyone or most people underestimated the noise that comes into the picture once you do that. Because we would assume that the liberation of information would result in healthy information and the freedom of healthy information. What I think was disregarded was that when you open the gates, the flood comes in.
Everybody goes in.
And everything goes in.
And it becomes garbage in, garbage out. That used to be the old
And
maxim.
it will be even more difficult to distinguish between what we call signal and noise, what is valuable and not. And to produce valuable information, it takes effort, resources, and goodwill.
And yet you and I are in the information business because you're an educator like I am. And in the same way that I spent probably a couple of minutes, because of the age I'm at the moment, at this period in my life, asking DeepSeek, ChatGPT, and Claude, why am I still teaching? And why am I still teaching at a university age 63? And is there any more use to this sort of teaching now that Gen AI is becoming mainstream? Are we going to be, is that something? And the answers I got were quite interesting, because I also put in on the basis of what you know about me, you, the machine. What can you tell me? And now I have several pages of pseudo political, philosophical, whimsical, machine-generated content.
As an academic, right? So I tend to even sort of, when even I ask the same question, either to myself or to any of this technology, my perspective zooms out a bit more, because I think over the years we took for granted the notion of a university and the idea of why we have a university, and the idea of having university as a space which is not just the next step that you take in your education, because you're used to structures where you have a static syllabus, you read, you study it, you go to an exam, you know what you're going to get, you pass, next step. At university, that shouldn't be the case. That's why even what I said earlier, you learn how to learn here. You don't learn specific subjects. So if you're here to learn a specific subject, you're wasting your time. So that also follows that universities were also created in a way, and if you think about it, they are like the buffer between the industry and education. So our responsibility at university is not to have a static syllabus. It is to have a structure where we can be flexible enough to adjust to the needs of society and the industry. So if we are not actually thinking and reflecting on what we're doing, we are also now wasting our time as academics. And I think the main challenge of generative AI in academia is exactly this, because we took this for granted over the years. There was no much effort being put in understanding why we're actually doing this, which brings us to your first difficult question. And if you don't know what you're doing, you end up in the comfort zone of having the same list of questions to give to your students, to assess them on, etc., etc. And when all of a sudden something comes over that reshapes information constantly and on the fly, then you need to then it's understandable that many people would have a crisis in understanding whether this has any future or not. And I think, long story short, is academia, as we're used to it in recent years, is screwed big time. So anyone comfortable giving exams, long essays at home, etc., etc., nothing stops you from giving those, but it doesn't mean that you have any guarantee that your students are learning. And another point of reflection on this is that for different reasons in education and pedagogy, we pushed for example, a variety of units. And this ended up in situations where we have a lot of assessment to give to our students. And now we are rendered into a new challenge where if we want to really make sure that our students are understanding, we need to engage in conversations. We no longer can rely on structures and systems where I would give Alex an assignment. He spends a semester working on it. He comes back, gives me the assignment or project or essay. I correct it, I give him a grade. Because Alex might use the technology to build a better assignment or might use the technology to generate the assignment. So I think there is a huge opportunity in all this if we really want to take it, to engage in meaningful conversations with our students. So the best way, two-way, for us even to learn as academics, because as academics, we are not an oracle who are here and we are the gatekeepers of information. And that is, I think, the main problem, is that now we are the facilitators of information. We are no longer the providers of information. So our job is to have meaningful conversations and time to have these conversations with our students, to make sure that they are really understanding the tools that they have today and using them in order to become stronger individuals. So that is, I think, the main challenge.
There are so many that I don't know which ones to pick on. Okay. If you want to change a syllabus over here, it takes about, 18 months to take it to the process?
Of course, yes. Which means for the next 2 years. And
which time in the next 2 years?
it will be obsolete by the minute you're
so
even in time to update it again. So,
I've wasted several hours or days together with my colleagues going through that system because the model of the university remains essentially Victorian. It also, I feel is...
The upside of it is if someone really wants to change that, I believe that it can be really changed efficiently because...
COVID did for a while.
For a while, but I think
and then it reverted.
This is more major than COVID because COVID was more visible because we had to wear a mask so you could see the effect. In this case, there are no masks, so you cannot see the effect.
I think that's such an interesting analogy. You mentioned conversations, and I'm getting Alex's cohorts, at the moment to do all sorts of things, and I want to get to the manifesto eventually because one of the things I'm getting them to do is look at something which has been written and has 2 iterations and challenge it. But you mentioned conversations. Now, one of my students and colleague of Alex's is basically saying nobody wants to ask any questions. And her view is that there are people turning up in lecture halls with the screens, shields between them and the person doing the performance, the stand-up comedy of education. And her view is like, how are we going to get these guys, because she's 50 and they're in their 20s, to ask questions? So what do you need to get younger people to ask, in my view, better questions? And in my view, what can we get to get young people to ask better questions of the AI tools, the Gen AI tools that they are now relying on?
There's an opportunity there.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think there's a huge opportunity. In fact, something that I try to do in class is there are points in the lecture where, after 20 minutes or so, the attention goes down. So it's you can use those specific moments where we can get a specific question or topic or concept. And we actually prompt our students to prompt AI and start to get some sort of answer about the question that we pose. And then we get the students to discuss the output, because that shield most of the time is there because of a certain level of insecurity that I believe is also our responsibility as university to help the individual break. Because, you cannot really go wrong in situations where you don't have a fixed answer. And that's the problem of education, because if you're brought up until you got to university that there's a right answer, wrong answer, make sure you give me the right answer because otherwise you're not good enough.
Multiple choice assessments.
Then it would force people to think that if they ask a question and they would think it is a stupid question, then they feel vulnerable, so they won't ask it. Generative AI provides a huge opportunity here because you can get students to discuss the output that they got from AI, and now they can shift the blame of the wrong answer. Look what it gave me. Look what I'm getting. Look what how I structured it. And that can start a conversation, because then if a student you tell me, look what it got, and I think this, and then I would just grab on that and tell you, okay, so tell me now what you think went wrong there. How would the AI could have sort of structured it differently, and so on. And I think that breaks the barrier, and you can use that shield, if we were to use that metaphor, as a bridge rather than that, to facilitate the conversation. But it takes huge effort on the person preparing, and it's an effort on ego, and it's not an effort on methodology, because at that point you have to also accept and expect and accept that the answer that the machine gives could be something that you even don't know. And it could give you an insight about your subject that no matter how experienced you are, could have found something else, that this is something that you don't know. So that is why I repeat again, you are now a facilitator of knowledge, no longer the oracle. Where fine, you have some experience, you can guide the conversation, you have experience enough to research whatever perspective is new to you as well. But you have to be humble enough to say, look, I never thought of this. Let's look into it together.
I think I was lucky enough because I got into academia late in my life and from a background in, whatever it is. I mean, I remember mainframe computers, okay? I used to work for Hitachi Data Systems, so I remember looking at a mainframe computer, which was the size of this, whatever it is. That I think this aura of expertise was missing for my generation, and especially for people like me who were essentially change agents. But change agents, let's change. I think this idea of, it's called like eat your own dog food. Okay, so in Alex's case, I got these guys to blog on Substack, and then I realized, well, then I need to get onto it too, and I need to run my own blog. Whilst these guys are supposed to be blogging, because I don't know how many people are. Okay, so I don't know if any of this resonates, because I want to try and turn this into, if you're going to university to meet somebody who's facilitating your knowledge, I mean, are we expecting all these people who turn up at university to have this love of lifelong learning?
I just also want to add a flip side to what Dylan was saying about when you do that classroom exercise, when you feel there's a lull, AI will also hallucinate sometimes. So in that process, you as the lecturer, as the ombudsman of whatever is being pulled out, you can also show that AI is also not completely infallible either. So because I know a lot of students who treat it like the same oracle.
Yes.
And they anthropomorphize it as well. I will ask him the questions.
Yeah, it's gender.
It's really interesting, because they refer to it like either with a pronoun or something. And it's interesting what kind of image they have of it in their mind. Because it's a false perception. It's like Dylan saying that we don't understand the actual mechanisms behind it. We don't understand that it's just basically a lot of computing power.
But what I meant is that, yes, your points are extremely valid. We can go through them. What I meant is we have to expect and accept as academics that the output could be a new perspective on our own subject, could be even on our own work.
Exactly, it's a flip side as well.
Sometimes I even feed it with my own papers that I've written myself and so on, far before generative AI, so I couldn't have generated them in any way. And it still provides different angles and perspective on my own work that I haven't thought of.
It's almost serendipity, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's a nice feeling as well. I mean, if in our case, as scientists, I believe that if you're a scientist because you're in a quest to discover something which you don't know. So, I mean, anything that comes forward from that perspective is great. So that's great news. But when you mentioned issues such as hallucinations, for example, you have to be a bit careful there, because, yes, there are hallucinations. In reality, there are two types of output in that case. Hallucinations are the most popular because they are the most, or the easiest one to refer to. We have also what we call confabulations. So in reality, we have two of them. Hallucinations are actually a feature of this technology because it is what empowers this technology to give you the information which is not so expected, and therefore go back to entropy, which I mentioned before. So the way the algorithm is structured in a way not to give you what you will definitely get. It will give you something else that would somehow surprise you and say, this is interesting. So that is in a way good, right? It's a feature. Confabulation is when you start mixing up things or imagining things that are not there. And that's a bit of a problem. Having said that, keep in mind that this technology is only a few years old. The fundamental technology that enabled all this generative AI was published for the first time as a scientific subject in 2017. So it's extremely new. By the time it was implemented into a system that works, it was 2020, but everyone was bothered about the masks, not about the impact of this. In reality, it was much bigger. And it is in 2022 that ChatGPT was released in a way that you can actually type something there. Google had demoed exactly the same thing in May 2021.
Nobody noticed.
Nobody realized the impact. In May 2021, during the I/O conference that happens every year, and within a few weeks it will be 20th May this year. We'll have, of course, this year's version. There was a demo by the CEO, Sundar Pichai, where he had a conversation with Pluto. And the conversation with Pluto as a planet, and Pluto was feeling sad about not being so. I mean, it's no longer in the club of planets and so on, and why, etc. And in fact, Google were the ones who created the technology in 2017 and the ones who built it. OpenAI released it in November 2022. Google could have released it in May 2022, and most people used to say back then, or are still saying, Google lost its advantage. But no, I disagree. Because that technology was very, very subject to these hallucinations, as you mentioned, and the level of reliability was not there. Google's business is not generative AI and chat. Google's business is we trust it with our emails, calendar, and all our lives, if you think about it. So they couldn't risk their reputation on a new fancy technology that could ruin their entire reputation altogether. OpenAI, few people knew about them, so they had nothing to lose. And in fact, they won a lot rather than that. And Google took its time to release its models, first as Bard, and when it was sure that Bard was working well, then they switched it to Gemini, which was their actual brand that they wanted to push. If you check the benchmark today, April, May 2025, Gemini is the best performing model. It's not the most popular one, but it's the best performing model. And what will happen over the years, at least my prediction is that it will all gravitate towards Google because it's a matter of computation and it's a matter of data. Since 2017, Google not only were developing this technology, we're also developing their own hardware, the TPU, Tensor Processing Unit. They are at the 6th generation now. They announced the last one 2 weeks ago exactly. And they have all the data, they have YouTube, Google Maps, all the reviews that you leave there, etc., etc. So once you combine all of those together, then the quality of the results that you get is great. And that is the point where these hallucinations will no longer be the issue that they used to be in the past 2 years, because all the modern tools now ground their results and output to some source. So if there is something and you're not sure about it and you think it's wrong, it provides you the source from where it got it and you can validate it. So I think what we really need to teach our students is how can you use this technology in a way to even use its output in a way to validate its own output. And I had a case where I thought it was wrong. I was naive enough to correct it, and then politely it corrected me back that I was misunderstanding another concept that bridges the gap. So at that point, I was no longer the guardian of information, and that's where you become the facilitator of information, because then I need to weigh its argument, something else, another source, reputable source, an academic paper that I was trusting, putting them together, and I said, okay, this is like meeting a more experienced academic, shedding light on this problem. And I think it's these interactions that will or should lead every academic to a certain point of realization that you are no longer the oracle of your subject.
I want to focus very briefly on the original reason why I really wanted to talk to you, because I have been in a state of like conflict in a way with three key paradigms, okay? The media, whatever that means, technology, whatever that means, and education, whatever that means. And it seems to me that the two of us have,
Yes,
more than a vested interest in this. And so what I've been doing is, besides publishing on things like truths or post-truths, because remember, what's happening across the pond in the US, we've had evidence of this since 2016 and beyond. And I remember being very conflicted about the idea that if we're now talking about the death of expertise, in other words, that I can say, this is not a phone with a black screen, but it's a red screen. It's a red screen. It's a red screen. And enough people say it's red. Some people might start believing it's red. And from then
they are ready to redefine the meaning of red and black in order so that your phone is now red.
Yeah, and that's how we went from the whole idea of fake news, alternative facts, and things like that. And that's where the whole concept of the manifesto for young people, and in terms of the relationship with information, came about. What we had done at the time, maybe I think I steered it that way because we had this big conference like in 2022. I tried to steer this whole notion of the crisis, my crisis maybe, but I thought it was young people's crisis too, in terms of media and media freedoms. What does it mean to have a media, and does it mean that you are free? The second one was information disorders, and the idea of information disorders being broken into three components of misinformation, which is accidental, you're making a mistake, disinformation where you're on purpose, you're lying essentially, and then malinformation where you're taking things which may be truthful but you take them out of context, but with a very bad design in your head. Okay. And the third one was behavior, seeing people behaving, especially young people behaving very differently. Okay, so I want to focus a bit on the first one, which is media freedoms. What is the media? And focusing on bias, and maybe AI bias, or whether AI can help us have better media. That's another loaded question.
Okay. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Okay, where shall we start?
What's the media for you? What is media in 2025?
I think the media is the vehicle or channel of information, right?
Yeah.
And it's a matter of then the follow-up question would be, what's information? And I read the manifesto. Well done, first of all. I haven't told you in public yet. It's a great piece of work. And I think bottom line, it's the message of an information diet. When it comes to food, we're educated about food. We know which food we should be eating. We know which food is not so good for us. We know that ideally we should be eating salad most of the time. We know that hamburger or fast food might not be a good idea to have all the time. And we are somehow educated, bombarded, etc., in a way that we structure ourselves that I know that even if I'm taking a hamburger or a pastis or whatever, then I know that fine, I'm doing that, but be careful, don't do it more than you should do. If I eat a salad, I feel good because I know that's the type of food that I should be eating, right? And but it doesn't mean I enjoy salads all the time, etc., etc. So we have to somehow take that analogy and somehow transfer it to information as well. And with information, it's the same thing. So if we're eating salad all the time, or most of the time, or trying to eat healthy as much as possible, just to avoid salads as with all their connotations, it's okay to say, fine, but today I really feel like a hamburger. There's nothing wrong with that. You can go eat one and fine, but it doesn't affect your lifestyle. You drink water most of the time during the day, but then you feel like having a beer. Nothing wrong with that. But if you substitute the two, then there's a problem. And I think with information, it's more or less the same. We have different sources of information that provide us with different nutrients as well. So we have information published or traditionally has been published in books, and or assume that there was thorough research in it in order to reach those conclusions based on references, etc., etc. And then you can say, okay, this is sort of the pure version of information, is what you're going to say. Then you would have, I see, the news and journalists somewhere in between, where they are reporting on events that are happening in close to real time. They would have their own own, of course, they're humans. They would have their own bias and necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And they would have their own perspective. But committed and professional journalists are the ones who are even researching the facts before publishing that information. So even with that assumption in mind, that's similar to the assumption of books, you would say, okay, if I'm reading the news on a reputable source, I'm assuming, trusting them, that they have researched this story before they are publishing it to me. Then you would have the social media, which I think is the social media that you're referring to, where out of nowhere, I would see an event happening in real time without researching, checking the other side of the coin, and so on. I'll just make my own conclusion, structure it nicely, and push it there so that everyone consumes. And that is the unhealthy version of hamburgers that you can actually consume. So the problem is not checking social media or reading social media. It is your diet in terms of information. So what I normally do would be, for example, I would read the news. There's a massive event going on. I don't know, the tariffs question and so on. And I would read the news. I would try to have a look at that. I use generative AI to understand or educate myself on certain economic topics, etc., which I'm not an expert in. But at least I would get certain understanding of what these are, their implications, etc. And but then I also check X, for example, formerly Twitter, where I know that there's a lot of noise. I know there's a lot of hamburgers there going on, but I don't base my diet there. I go there because there are a lot of things going on. You may find certain key individuals who are pushing their message there as well, who would mean well, etc. And you would also see how other people are understanding it and perhaps even flipping the story. And you can only make that sort of judgment because you're exposed to the entire spectrum of food and diet before you make such a conclusion. So the way I see it, there's nothing wrong in each medium in itself. It is our responsibility as consumers, and I think the manifesto does a great job at that, on how we should educate ourselves in order to or on how to consume that information. So I think that's the real. As I see it, this is the real question.
I think the issue is, though, that, and Alex is definitely not representative of this, that most young people are consuming the news through social media.
I wouldn't say just young people. And,
you're probably right.
You're also an exception to the rule in the same way I am, because a lot of people
that is true
in that age bracket after the pandemic.
We triangulate, okay? So I think what you're talking about is, you go from one source, okay? So, yeah, I mean, I think I had got my students, I think one of the first things I got you guys to do is, when you wake up in the morning, what do you do? And I know it's 5 o'clock in the morning because I'll go to the BBC and I'll go to the FT, but then I'll go to Facebook and then I'll make sure that my son is still alive somewhere. So I check if he's on WhatsApp and whatever it is. And then you sort of...
In the meanwhile, you make a coffee.
And in the meantime, you make a coffee. In the meantime, you're listening to something streamed.
And even if you read the news, the tariffs, for example, don't check the news, check the stock market as well. Exactly. See how they're changing, because it could be a matter of reporting some behavior, but when you see the actual values, you may get another insight.
But I always had a bit of a problem with the news, facts, truths, who checks these things. Because at the end of the day, news are always, we talk about a news story. And I've always thought that, well, stories are, what human beings decide as to what is truthful and what isn't, or what is something that's going to get my attention and what isn't. And in the attention economy, which is what we're into now, that's what we're at. So me saying that most young people are getting their news, and I stand corrected, most of us are using screens and using all of these social media platforms that we trust them to entertain us. So now we've gone into a performance economy, an entertainment economy. And in fact, and it goes back to education now, education is not exactly the most entertaining of things. Now, should we be looking at more entertaining information, more entertaining education, more entertaining media? That's where we are. One of the things that Alex has been doing is going around doing vox pops, speaking to various people and asking people, what's a manifesto? And do you think this thing will work? What was the reaction?
Most people don't read.
Mm-hmm. Even if this is just bullet points with maximum 50 words for each point. Yes. Yeah.
Even medium seems off-putting.
We actually changed the design of version 1, which I tested with people in digital arts who said, this is boring, this is ugly, I don't like the color, this is looks, this offends my whatever. It's not LGBT plus whatever it is, and we try different colors and things like that. But if you have a situation where young people are saying, hey, we don't want to read anymore, to give it to me in bite-sized portions, make sure it's entertaining. For my concern at the moment is that it's not Alex's generation, but potentially Generation Alpha, that are going to have a problem with being literate, being able to read and write.
Literate isn't the word. It's rooted in how long you can follow a thread of any author or any person for that matter, right? I mean, you can see it in like when you're looking at the analytics of YouTube videos, right? Most of the viewership starts in the beginning and then falls.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing. Like if you can't handle a 10-minute YouTube
Spotify
video,
albums, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
first track.
And the same is for even a book, like to some extent. Like if you can't follow that through, if you can't get your mind to follow like a long form anything, argument, video, lecture, anything, right? If you don't actively try and maintain that skill,
But it's again, it's a matter of the decades, right? So is this technology changing over the decades and the information?
So what do you do? How do we adjust in terms of media for the time being? Okay, what do we do? I mean, I know people who are now, like me, I listen to loads of podcasts. I watch loads of YouTube or half watch. Most of my learning is not happening via obscure academic journal articles, unfortunately, in my area, and I teach new media and digital literacies. I'm learning quite a lot when I'm going on my walks. Now, am I looking at things the wrong way? And is my suspicion that
no one
media, as we know it, is so severely disrupted that I don't know what's next?
No one knows, I think. And I think anyone coming forward with a potential solution, I think it's just an opinion at this point.
We teach journalism in my faculty.
Yes, but it's in every discipline. If you think about it, it's very serious because it's in every different discipline. And I think the most vulnerable level of education at the moment and subject to the threat of this technology is tertiary education. It's not the rest, because the rest is structured. The rest, that what you need to learn, etc. So it's tertiary education, because over the years, before generative AI, forget generative AI at the moment, there was, I call it a phenomenon of subcontracting effort to think, or subcontracting thinking. And I think we were given sort of the implication through different sources and so on, that I can somehow subcontract my effort in thinking to someone else to do it. And if you are relying on not making your own arguments, not getting to know yourself, your area and so on, and somehow figuring out a way, and you are sort of taking a perspective from someone else and just following it, that is the subcontracting I'm referring to, then you're no longer taking lead of your own thinking system, of your own self as a person. Now, this became amplified, and it confirms that I was right from that perspective, because now everyone has their own 5 super apps on their phones, Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, which you can ask. They're super powerful in ways that few people can really appreciate how powerful they are. That you can even subcontract your thoughts even more than before. And if you use them to subcontract your thought, you have a bigger problem than before. And I think that's the problem. If you use them to challenge your thoughts and to somehow find your way or get a different level of perspective, just like reading different books, I think that's a different way of using them. Personally, I have my own recipe, but it doesn't mean it's right. So my wife reminds me that I buy a lot of books. So I'm constantly purchasing a lot of books. And I find the latest ones and so on and go through them. And my reading process over the past 2 years has evolved in a way where I take a book, I take a marker, and I highlight all the time and take notes. And whenever that author mentions some other author, some other book, etc., before it was not feasible to take the other book, read it, and so on. It's not feasible, it's impossible. But with this technology, if I'm reading the context of that book in itself, I can all of a sudden branch a little explore the notion of whichever other source is cited in that book and so on, but I can then continue on that narrative. And then I would mix different books that are discussing the same subject together. I would take my notes if I'm actually focusing on one particular topic or area, and my area is something which is in flux big time at the moment. So the only way I can do that is take different books from reputable authors or leaders there. I would see their perspectives. They're not always aligned. They're not always the same. I don't agree with all of them at the same time and so on. So I put everything there. I focus just on books because as a human and the way our focus and our eyes actually works and I can read and so on, that's the level of information my body actually evolved into consuming, because that's another problem. I focus on that, master my own thoughts, go for a walk perhaps and so on. I take those. Then we have other magical tools now in AI that we can use, magical figuratively, right? Because we know exactly what they're doing. And we can take all that information. We put it in these tools. One of my favorite ones is Notebook LM. Put them there. Get a podcast generated out of it, 15 minutes and so on. And this is what I tell my students as well. Your lecturer asked you to study a book cover to cover for your exam. No problem. Don't try to change that lecturer because probably you won't manage. Take that book, upload a Notebook LM, generate a podcast about it, and now you have no excuse. Use your earpods and go for a walk. And just walk and listen. The insights and so on, conversation about that book. Go back and then skim through the book. Now you're reading it totally differently from before. Then find some YouTube video from an economist talking about the subject that you're studying or another whatever. Put it again in Notebook LM with the other sources and get a new podcast. Different views tied together. Create a mind map, create a briefing notes, FAQs, and do it again. And that's a way of studying in ways we could have never imagined before. And no academic, no matter how good or important they feel they are, can actually deliver the same learning experience. What you can do as an academic is harness those tools, tell your students about them, and show them how to use them so that they can work on your subject even better, assuming and accepting that they can even become better than you at your subject than you were. And that's your responsibility as an educator.
No, I think you and I are very much aligned on this one. And it's quite interesting because, I mean, I'm using the blog simply, even like, and I know people aren't reading it, but there's a lot of this kind of stuff. I'm saying, I went out for a walk, I listened to this, okay, here's a book. But the idea of using Notebook LM as a way of, I mean, I feel like I've got a research assistant on speed. I've never learned as quickly, or learning has not been as much fun as it's been over the last 18 months. But if you had to look at the whole concept of media now, media also used to be, I mean, mainstream media, journalistic media. It used to be about access to certain information, which people like you and I would not have. Okay, so the idea of the journalist used to be, politicians will speak to me, they will not speak to you as a result. I have a news story which you could never have. And I feel that that's why mainstream media is now in a bit of trouble.
It's challenged,
and it's being challenged, I think, from that point of view.
It's because we don't need intermediaries as much as we needed them before. I mean, the Instagram influencers and these intermediary outlets that your brother complains about will also die out as a result. Like I remember, have you ever come across Sabine Hofstadter? She's quite active on YouTube. She once made a really good point whilst I was listening to her predictions about the impact of generative AI, is that it will elevate the value of good human interpretation of what's happening in the world, because there will be so much of this noise that just keeps coming out and out. It will just deplatformize anybody who had the platform purely out of convenience or circumstance, or, you know, I got in here early, I have more followers. That won't matter anymore.
It also goes back to the age-old question about, you know, social media platforms continuing to say that they're agnostic. In other words, that they're just, you know, it's user-generated, and as a result, they should not be responsible for what's being carried over the platforms in terms of the veracity of it. But if you go back to information, that then opens up another kind of worms.
But it doesn't mean that we should change that either, right? Because the role of the platform, I think there's value in having the platform not moderating itself as well.
And regulation? And how do you feel about the regulation thing, that social media platforms should be regulated at par as, say, he mentioned my brother, who's an editor of a newspaper. Those guys have to adopt certain, they have to behave in a certain way and are supposed to check their
I think
sources.
their responsibility, rather than checking their sources and so on, I think their responsibility is checking the product that they're building before checking the sources, because most of the issues are about the recommendation algorithms rather than the sources themselves. Because you may argue that in a world of free speech, there is no information which is wrong information or unneeded information. All information is somehow valuable, because even low quality information, to be polite, is also important, so that we appreciate high quality information. Otherwise, you cannot value high quality information if you don't see. The problem is, if that platform is feeding you with more low-quality information than high-quality information. And I think the true reflection that needs to go around these platforms is not trying to transform those platforms into something that we had before, because it doesn't work. It will never work. And nature and engineering never work that way either. So we should understand the power of those platforms and the opportunity that those platforms give us, in a way that when we're regulating or we're building something, we don't render them to something that they are not. We harness their opportunity and we make sure that they deliver that opportunity. So if, for example, you have negative content that is being fed to a teenager and the teenager is vulnerable at that point, it doesn't mean that that information, if you're consuming it as a 60-year-old, it doesn't pose the same risks. So
Context matters.
They have to be quite responsible in the way they're using the algorithms to see which information is being fed to whom and how.
But most people have no idea how an algorithm works. You obviously do.
I do to a certain extent. I do if someone would ask me how to build it myself and so on. The problem is that most of these algorithms would be proprietary and really, really close source. So I can tell you all the theory about recommendation engines and so on. I can give you all the ingredients that you can mix together to build an even better new one, arguably. But I don't know which one Instagram is using, the one Facebook is using, X is using. They have all their own mix and recipe in doing so, because an algorithm is a recipe at the end of the day. It's a fancy way for a recipe. I can ask you to sort a number of a set of numbers. There are different ways of sorting a number, comparing to the next one, splitting the list into two and comparing every split and so on. So the algorithm is, what recipe am I using to sort that list? The program is the implementation of any algorithm.
And that's a black box.
Not always, right? So you can somehow look at it, you can study it, you can make very confident predictions of how it could potentially be working. But I think but that's something for us scientists to do. I think the main problem and challenge is, if we were to regulate, I think we have to regulate certain transparency on making sure that those who need to be protected in society are actually protected. Because I am all in for free speech. I am only concerned about how that free speech is channeled to whoever and in any situation being controlled by another machine. And your brother is an editor. The problem is that the editors are these algorithms now. Your brother can weigh things that an algorithm cannot weigh, because one is a human, the other one is not. So we have to look into this in a way to understand that these are the editors. The program is now the editor. And just like your brother is regulated as an editor and he's responsible for the content that his newspaper is publishing, the same thing should apply for these algorithms, so that we can understand how it chose to give a teenager negative information and not give it to you, or how it was feeding you with other information that would affect you in the way you decide about whom to vote for, etc., because a teenager cannot. So I think that is the type of regulation, if any, that we need to consider.
But if the second component of this manifesto is information disorders, I mean, do you believe that AI tools, at least as they are now, can they help us in terms of identifying the veracity of content, of whether something is true
in fact,
or not?
Those are all the projects that I'm leading at university at the moment. So I can just go quickly through a few of them. We have one of them, for example, that analyzes the image in an article and compares the content of the image with the text, headline, and body of the article. See whether there is certain alignment, whether they match, and so on. And if there is a misalignment, it would flag the user and tell the user, listen, make sure that you read the article because we're seeing a mismatch between them. It doesn't tell you the conclusion, it's just flagging it to you. We're studying also gender portrayal in the media. So which gender is being referred to with sentiment by source, different newspapers, but even within the same source, a single newspaper, there could be different sentiment towards a gender or the other if it's in the crime category or fashion category or cars category. So there is also that. There are also other questions. For instance, crime. How is crime being reported? If we were to study the press releases that are issued by the police force, and which of those crimes are actually reported in the media, by which magnitude, etc. So these are all different tools that we're developing in the philosophy of designing a ruler. And the ruler is there. And our principle is this. That's why we collaborate as well with our brother, where we first give the ruler to the journalist to make sure that we're not hindering their work, because it's not a matter, and we're not starting from the assumption that the journalists are there to trick the public. So we provide that ruler to the journalists, and the idea is that, for instance, taking the image similarity with or coherence with the rest of the article, the journalist would see whether there is an alignment. If there is not, the journalist would be flagged before publishing. But the journalist has all the freedom to tell you, I want to shock my audience, this is my choice, I know about it, I want to proceed. Proceed, fair enough. But that is the same ruler that the public then will use on your article that you published. And I think the opportunity in AI is not to interfere in the process, because we'll make it even more noisy, more chaotic. But in a situation where we have technology that is now responsible somehow for all this huge volume of information, and when you increase the volume of information, you increase the likelihood of having good quality and low quality information, I think somewhere there is this opportunity that we can use another aspect or perspective of that technology. And I believe, and you asked me before, why are you building this through university? Because I believe it's one of the responsibilities of university to build such technology that, one, are not attractive for the commercial sector to develop, because they're not explicitly profit-making from day zero. It's difficult to have a business plan around them. And it is the responsibility of a university that it somehow explores even new tools that would somehow affect, influence, or facilitate the thought process of society. So that is why I believe this is the right place to build those tools. And building them together, even with journalists, the public, and over the past 3 years that I've been working on these projects, we built a community. We're very careful on how much we promote it so that it is sustainable and it grows organically without getting more noise than needed within it, right? And together
As a
we're
public
building this.
good, though. As a public good, or is it a closed?
We actually have a project now. All these projects have been funded by Scienza Malta, and we apply. It's a competitive call where we apply every year for different projects. And one of these projects called at the moment, it's an online platform where we're serving these tools. And the idea is we make these tools, once we build them, we build these individual ones. We have around 13 of these. And now we're building a platform where we're going to serve these tools to journalists and the public. And the idea is how we're going to serve them, because we do not want to create any of the problems or new problems from what we discussed over the past hour, right? And in fact, we have on board lawyers, ethicists. It's part of the MDIA technical assurance sandbox, for example, as well, to make sure that everything is aligned with regulations, etc. And we build something which is sustainable and beneficial to society. We have journalists, we have the public and focus groups, etc. So I invite anyone, if I may make an advert, to join our website, AI, or visit our website, ainewsanalysis.org. It's quite easy. And the idea is people can just get in touch over there. We have a form where you can just fill and you're part of a list. And whenever we have a focus group or some initiative to try out this technology and so on, you can be part of the conversation and build it with us.
I want to finish with the third bit, which is probably the most challenging, okay, which is understanding human behavior now that we've we're at this particular moment in time, because there are many sweeping statements, and and many people are responsible for the sweeping statements.
Because they carry entropy.
Because they can, and because it's also a case of saying that it wasn't it wasn't the 1984 George Orwell way of looking at what was going to happen, but it was the Brave New World.
Exactly.
People,
In fact, it's
people
quite a
stopped.
strong link,
People
yeah.
stopped reading books. People stopped doing things, and also I think related to it is the whole myth or expectation of what's going to happen with AGI, with agentic. So if you can, I'm not saying give us some comfort, because I know that we're peering into what a bit of mist at the moment. What's your take on a situation where I frequently have people who have young kids? I mean, young kids like you potentially, but even like people with 3-year-olds saying, I know that the screen is going to be bad for my child, but under social, in terms of social comparison, if everybody else has a phone, I'm going to give my child a phone. This whole thing about the banning stuff.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you've got this whole thing about, I'm also thinking about the positives as well, by the way. Okay, my father is 88 years old. I would love him to have an AGI helper that could talk to him about all sorts of rubbish, which he enjoys talking to, as opposed to him having to hoof it down to the cafe in his village. So that's the last barbed question, and you can riff about it in any way you wish.
I mean, I'm quite open about this. So what I say in private is what I say in public on these matters. It's my responsibility as a scientist as well. Well, once the mist clears, there's the outlook is not so nice either, right? Because the reality is ultimately that now we built this technology. We have these tools. It's based on scientific principles that have been evolving for long decades. So it's not something that was just invented now in our generation. This is the responsibility of different generations. So it's not. Sometimes we tend to blame people who are there today, but in reality, it's something which has been evolving, and it's the quest of society towards pushing knowledge. You can argue it was the same thing with the Gutenberg press until today, and there were books which were great, of good quality. It was used the first time. There was Copernicus publishing his, and the other book, I forgot the name, about the witchcraft and how you should kill a witch, when it was far more popular than Copernicus' book. And you can argue the same thing today on social media, right? So the problem is there, and it's not there with technology today, it's there with information, and that's why the manifesto is really, really relevant. AGI is human level intelligence, general intelligence. Today we have a system that can play chess, but if you give the same system to play Ludo, for example, which could be a simpler game, it cannot play it, right? So that's what we're just generalizing, right? In reality, it's more complicated than this. But just to get the line of thought, it's not generalizable, right? So it's trained on one task, it does it really well, outperforms anything else, but then it cannot easily be shifted to something else. General intelligence is when you can get this general feel. And generative AI is giving us sort of a peek towards what could potentially this be, right? Because you have the same thing and you can give it, you can ask it questions about poetry, it can generate poetry, you can ask it about mathematics, generate proofs, etc. So it's giving us this sense of generalizable intelligence. And I'm not sure whether it's right or wrong. I see it as right, and it's good, because in reality, probably would see it as something which is negative because it's challenging our comfort zone and our status quo. We would argue, would you trust a radiologist with AI or without AI? I would trust one with AI.
I know I had some blood tests, and the first thing I did was pump them into Notebook LM, and
Exactly.
I got probably a better analysis of what was happening than my doctor gave me.
So at the moment, I wouldn't go, or I would ask the professional taking care of me whether they are using AI or not, because I would want them, yes, use them and get the insights there, and then free your mind from sort of the low-level task and focus on the real problem itself, how we're going to deal with it now, with your experience, etc. Because at the moment, AI is not there. But what if we get to an AI that can also give you conclusions? If I ask you today, probably you tell me, oh, I won't trust an AI with even the conclusion or the diagnosis or the path to actually recover. But what if we get an AI that makes mistakes less than half that a consultant actually makes? What would you do at that point? What would the generation of my son, who will turn 3 soon, think about that? Because that is the paradigm shift now of this decade. If you are in situations where you have technology doing even better than the best professionals, what do you do? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So the problem here, and this is, I think, the discomfort that we're feeling at university, etc., is that now we have something else. Because throughout history, humans always made a very, I think, presumptuous or rude assumption that we are the most intelligent creature on the planet, Homo sapiens. I think now we need to start getting comfortable with the idea that there is something else which is also more intelligent than us. Whether it has agency or not, that's another matter. In fact, it doesn't. We know exactly how these things are working, how these things are learning, but they're coming out with insights that are even better than ours. So if these are designed as tools, and by the way, AI is being built by other humans, AI is not building itself. So we're building this together through the past decades. So it's not something that just came on us and we need to understand what it is. If we design these tools in a way, a chatbot today, you can just prompt it. It's designed not to interfere, but it could be a new product. It could be a different paradigm shift over the next 10 years that it just interferes. You're wearing a ring that is running your diagnosis and so on. You wouldn't even need to go to get your blood test and run it. So if you think about it, it's reshaping our life in a way. And it is restructuring all the societal comforts that we had until now, including education and anything, any field of study. Take every faculty at university, each of them is challenged. So look at that. And I think I believe there's an opportunity through it. But first, we need to ease ourselves and train ourselves to get a little bit of flexibility in how we're doing things. And because we did it this way for the past years, it doesn't mean we don't have to change it tomorrow back to university. It doesn't mean that if at the moment we're taking 18 months to change a study unit, I think that is the only thing that university can do to address this, make this change more efficient, faster, so that we can update our way of dealing and working with our students in an efficient way, that the pace of the world is changing. I think that sums what I just said in the past hour and so.
Okay, I'm good with that. I mean, thanks for your time.
Thank you,
I think
Alex.
we're all on a change program. I think we're all change agents. We're just going to have to find different ways of how we're going to get some things done while we can.
We'll get there.
Thank you.
Thank you.